Iran comes in from the cold. This is SkyWatchTV for Monday, January 18th, 2016. I'm Derek Gilbert, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We're going to focus on two main stories today because they're connected in ways that aren't immediately obvious. First of all, Iran. The International Atomic Energy Agency certified that Iran has complied with the terms of the nuclear deal agreed to with the U.S. and other Western countries, poured concrete into the reactor at the Arak nuclear facility, which had been designed to produce plutonium. So Saturday, President Obama issued an executive order removing oil and financial sanctions against Iran that releases about $100 billion, possibly as much as $150 billion that had been frozen in a New York bank. That's roughly 30% of Iran's annual gross domestic product. It would be like somebody just handing the United States government about $5 trillion. So and in addition to this, the U.S. will also pay Iran $1.7 billion. This was a loan that had been frozen, the payments frozen when relations between the countries went sour. $400 million in principal plus $1.3 billion in interest. This took place just hours after a swap of prisoners Saturday between the U.S. and Iran. 5 Americans were released, including a Washington Post reporter and Pastor Saeed Abedini. In exchange, 7 Iranians convicted or charged with trying to break the U.S. embargo were released, 14 others removed from international wanted lists. Of course, Republican presidential candidates have criticized the deal as showing weakness, perhaps setting a bad precedent that we're willing to negotiate for hostages. This deal capped off a week that began with the capture and then release of 10 American sailors, U.S. Navy personnel, detained by Iran when 2 patrol boats drifted too close to an Iranian military installation on Farsi Island in the Persian Gulf. Now, frankly, this story still doesn't make a lot of sense. While Iran played it for propaganda value, humiliating the sailors by videotaping them while they were on their knees, hands locked behind their heads, and then posting that video around the world via the internet, there are questions about how those boats wound up in Iranian waters in the first place. The boats, 49-foot patrol boats called Riverine Command boats, were sailing from Kuwait to Bahrain. Now, the Navy knows that things are tight in the Persian Gulf, close quarters. So you have to assume that the sailors plotted their route before they left Kuwait and were very careful. The boats surely have radio equipment. So if, as we're told, one of the boats suffered a mechanical breakdown, why didn't they call for help? Why weren't boats on the way to these boats before they were surrounded by Iranian boats? These riverine command boats are often used to carry special forces personnel on missions. And surely the Iranian military knows this, which may be why they got a little touchy about having these boats within a few miles of a sensitive military base. And why would Iran release these sailors in less than 24 hours? Well, we have to remember Iran is a government that has different factions that don't always agree, just like we do here in the United States. It's possible that the Republican Guard, whose base on Farsi was the one we got close to, wanted to hold these sailors longer, whereas cooler heads in Tehran, looking at the deal that was announced over the weekend to release between $100 and $150 billion, said, let's not jeopardize the deal, let's let those sailors go, regardless of what they were doing. Now, on Sunday, the United States government did announce new sanctions against Iran, targeting its ballistic missile program. The president identified 11 companies and individuals who have allegedly violated UN sanctions on their program. A spokesman for the Iranian government said the sanctions have no legal or moral legitimacy and promised that Iran would step up its legal missile program. Now, while the administration basked in the glow of the prisoner swap over the weekend, 3 American contractors went missing in Baghdad. 2 men, 1 woman, all of Iraqi origin. One report said that the Americans were abducted from the apartment of their translator, their interpreter, who had invited them over. But the Washington Post has another spin on the story. They quoted a resident of the building where they were captured and said that the apartment where they were found is well known as a brothel. The Iranian-backed Shiite militia group Asaib Ahi al-Haq reportedly has a strong presence in that particular neighborhood in Baghdad and regularly raids that brothel, although usually when they catch men inside, they just tell them to get lost instead of taking them captive. So far, no group has claimed responsibility or made any demands. Now, the other benefit to Iran of the United States lifting sanctions is the freedom now for Iran to sell its oil on the open market. Experts say that Iran could increase its oil output by as much as a million barrels a day by the end of 2016, which, even if oil prices remain low, around $30 a barrel, could mean $3 to $4 billion per month in new revenue coming into the Iranian government. Now, needless to say, this makes the Sunnis in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Sudan, United Arab Emirates, and so forth, very, very nervous. Also makes Israel very nervous. An unnamed source in Jerusalem told Israel's army radio over the weekend that the money would go first to military expenditures rather than to civilian projects, which could mean, the source said, that Hezbollah and Hamas will be the beneficiaries of some new upgraded weapons systems. Now, there's an economic downside to bringing all this new oil onto a market that is already oversupplied, mainly because the Saudis cranked up production in order to drive down the price of oil. You see, Saudi Arabia knew that by driving down the price of oil, it would hurt Iran and Russia more than it would hurt the Saudis. The Saudis don't need the price of oil to be quite as high as Iran and Russia in order to balance its budget. And of course, Iran and Russia are the Saudis' main opponents in the Sunni-Shia proxy war taking place in Syria. But there's a second bird that is killed with this single stone, and that is the American shale oil industry. Those shale producers have been caught in this crossfire between the Saudis and the Iranians. I happen to get to know some men in the shale oil business in southern Illinois, where 2 years ago they were expecting an oil boom similar to the one in western North Dakota. The geography is very similar, and by some estimates, there may be as much as 5 to 6 times the oil under North Dakota and southern Illinois as there is in Saudi Arabia. The thing is, it's a lot deeper underground, and it's locked in shale, which means the cost of production is much, much higher. I've been told about $80 a barrel is the break-even point. So, at $80 a barrel, below $80 a barrel, it's no longer profitable to drill new wells. At $30 a barrel, not only is drilling unprofitable, it's not profitable to even operate those wells. And you can see that by the rig count chart on your screen now, which has dropped by more than 2/3 over the last 14 months as operators decide it isn't worth pumping the oil and selling it at a loss. Now, I, for one, am glad to see that I can fill up my gas tank for under $15. But this sort of thing doesn't happen in a vacuum. And this is where things are all connected and tied together. The financial news website Zero Hedge reports that the drop in the price of oil is causing problems for American banks. According to 2 men who were at or aware of a meeting reported by Zero Hedge, the Dallas branch of the Federal Reserve Bank recently called together representatives from banks in Houston, which is the center of the American oil industry. Banks were told by the Dallas Fed not to foreclose on energy companies that had fallen behind on loan payments, but instead to insist on asset sales to raise the money they need to catch the loans up. In addition, the Dallas Fed has stopped marking to market energy-backed debt. Now, this is significant because something similar happened to mortgage-backed debt, mortgage-backed securities, just before the subprime mortgage industry collapsed and the real estate bubble popped in 2006. You see, oil properties that are being used as collateral for loans are much more valuable when oil is being sold for $100 a barrel than when oil is selling for $30 a barrel. But when the Fed is giving banks permission not to reflect that change on their balance sheets, it hides the fact that at $30 a barrel, banks holding a lot of energy property secured loans are essentially bankrupt. And the price of oil may decline even further once Iran ramps up its production. It could quintuple its output, as I said, up to 1 million barrels a day by the end of 2016. So the Fed's decision to allow banks to stop marking these loans to market, again, shows that they are not actively reflecting the value of these loans on their balance sheets, and again, hiding the fact that a number of these banks are upside down. How serious is the problem? Well, the bank that is probably the most exposed to energy debt is Wells Fargo. They said in a conference call on Friday, a conference call with investors, that they currently hold about $17 billion in debt. And during that conference call, Wells Fargo disclosed that they have allocated about $1.2 billion in loss allowance for those energy-backed debts. That's about a 7% loss allowance, which according to Zero Hedge is one of the highest ratios on Wall Street among investment banks. When the bank was asked during the conference call how much of the $17 billion in loans that the bank holds is not investment grade, in other words, junk bond status, the bank said basically all of it. So in other words, Wells Fargo was holding about $17 billion in junk bonds and only $1.2 billion in loss allowance to cover those debts if the people who took out the loans, the companies that took out the loans, begin to default. Now, I'm no professional economist, even though I've got an undergraduate degree in economics, but simple math tells me that 17 billion is much larger than 1.2 billion. Remember, of course, that Wells Fargo is not the only bank holding debts that are secured by oil-producing properties, and that Wells Fargo probably has allocated a higher percentage of its resources to cover losses from these type of loans than other investment banks on Wall Street. This explains why the Dallas Fed is telling banks not to foreclose on oil companies and to hide the true value of the assets that they're holding as collateral against those loans. Again, these loans, the assets being held to collateralize the loans, worth much less now than they were 18 months ago because of the collapse in the price of oil. Now, one analyst said the only way to bring oil prices back to a range where these loans are viable for the banks again, and the companies that have taken out the loans, is to eliminate the oversupply of oil on the market. But doing that would probably require a huge wave of defaults among American shale oil producers, which would probably mean a round of bank failures and possibly the American taxpayer on the hook for another round of bank bailouts. Now, the size of the problem is not nearly the size of the mortgage bubble 10 years ago. Don't have an exact figure on it, but just bear in mind the size of the mortgage bubble at the time real estate prices began to collapse was on the high side of $10 trillion. So, but just be prepared. Things are interconnected. Releasing Iran to sell oil on the world market increases the supply of oil on the world market, which further depresses the price of oil, which puts more stress on the American oil industry. You and I are paying less at the pump for gasoline, but many of our fellow Americans no longer have jobs to drive to. This week on SkyWatch TV, we discuss something that would be rather problematic in today's political climate. Millennia ago, God promised Abraham, probably about 4,000 years ago, that his descendants would inherit the land from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. You can see by this map, courtesy of Koinonia House, that why this would be a political problem. It includes quite a few areas that right now are hostile to Israel. Now, there are some who believe that the land promised to Abraham was fulfilled during the time of Solomon, but that is not believed by everybody. In fact, our guest this week in SkyWatch TV contends that the land promise of Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant, is still relevant today. And we'll find out why Tuesday night on SkyWatch TV on the Christian Television Network. New York Times bestselling author Joel Richardson joins us for a second week discussing his book, When a Jew Rules the World. SkyWatch TV airs on the Christian Television Network at 9:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. That is the Christian Television Network, Glory Star Satellite Channel 117, DirecTV Channel 376, and Dish Network Channel 267. If you don't have satellite TV, you can also watch it online. The Christian Television Network's website streams their programming live at ctnonline.com. As January continues, we continue our gift to you for your gift to us. For your donation to SkyWatch TV of any dollar amount, while supplies last, we offer this Miracles Journal for you to record the miracles happening in your life, and this very handy wooden bookmark. You can keep up with where you are in your daily devotions. Again, our gift to you for your gift of any amount during the month of January, while supplies last, and instructions on how to donate are posted at skywatchtv.com. You can also help SkyWatch TV by sharing what we post to the internet around to your friends and family members. You'll find the things that we post here online. Click like, click share, and you help SkyWatch TV spread the word just with the click of a mouse. And if you're curious to find out what's falling out of my head these days, that's where I post it to the internet, Twitter, Facebook, and my own website. And if you want to get in touch with me directly or just send us a comment or a question, address those to dgilbert@skywatchtv.com. And thank you for watching. As we keep watch, I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is SkyWatch TV.